Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. We are from Group 13, will present our presentation, Language, Cognition, and Culture. Our members are Aghna Shafa Audreia Putri, Muhammad Ghofur, Nurjanah Tri Wulandari, Sari Novita Ningrum, and Elvan Wahyu Ramadya Almussawa. The materials are language and perception, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, linguistic categories and culture, discourse patterns and culture, language, social class, and cognition. Okay, the first is language and perception. Language simply reflects the social context in which it is produced. Can language determine the way we perceive reality? Does the language we speak determine the way we think? Language reflects thought. Language is an instrument used to express thought. The next is verbal hygiene. Verbal hygiene is the thought-provoking term used by Deborah Cameron to describe how people respond to urge to meddle in matters of language, that is, the effort to improve or correct speech and writing or to arrest change in a language, also known as prescriptivism and language purism. The work of verbal hygienists. Verbal hygienists are the people who are enjoying and arguing about words, correcting the writing of others, and looking things up in dictionaries and usage guides. Their activities are born of the urge to improve and clean up the language. Okay, the first is euphemism and connotations. Verbal hygiene involves replacing offensive language with politically correct or euphemistic language. Example, the replacement of disabled with physically challenged or woman with lady. The second is diagnosing problems. With reference to both speech and writing, most of us practice linguistic hygiene, brushing or sweeping away what we see as pollutants such as jargon, vulgarism, profanity, bad grammar, and mispronunciations, and sometimes in the process replacing one kind of evil with another.
The next material is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Edward Sapir advanced a hypothesis called Sapir-Whorf hypothesis in 1929, and this hypothesis subsequently developed by Benjamin Whorf, that the structure of a language determines native speakers' perception and categorization of experience. Whorf noticed that the particular words selected to describe or label objects often influenced people's perceptions and behavior. Vocabulary and cognition. The particular words selected to describe or label objects often influence people's perceptions and behavior. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, also known as the hypothesis of linguistic relativity, holds that the structure of a language affects its speaker's worldview or cognition. The principle is often defined to include two versions. First, the strong version. This version says that language determines thought and that linguistic categories limit and determine cognitive categories. The second is the weak version. This version says that linguistic categories and usage only influence thought and decisions. Linguistic determinism. The medium is the message. The strong form of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is generally labeled linguistic determinism. This holds that people from different cultures think differently because of differences in their languages. The main problem in assessing Whorf's argument is the danger of inescapable circularity. We observe that languages differ and conclude that the thought patterns of their speakers also differ. But the only evidence we have that their thought patterns differ is the language they use. Example, a native speaker of Hopi from North Arizona perceives reality differently from a native speaker of English because they use a different language. Some languages have linguistic categories which take account of the shape of objects. Example, the form of Navajo verbs is sometimes determined by the shape of the object. Navajo-speaking children are typically much faster than English-speaking children in categorizing blocks by shape. Navajo children tend to group objects according to shape, while English-speaking children group them according to color. The next material is grammar and cognition. Grammatical categories such as tense, aspect, and gender encode aspects of reality differently in different languages. Wolff's analysis of the Hopi verb system led him to argue that the Hopi conception of time is fundamentally different from that of Western cultures. Speakers of European languages often conceive time as a road, for instance, with the future ahead and the past behind. Wolff suggested this is because of the verb tense system of Indo-European languages. And there is a great debate whether language is a cognitive or a social phenomenon. Cognitivists view language as purely a cognitive phenomenon, whereas sociolinguists feel that linguistic development needs to be understood in the light of its relationship with social factors such as social class, race, gender, ethnicity, and so on, and yet others are interested to study how social factors such as social class have a relationship with the development of linguistic cognition. Psycholinguists consider language a cognitive construct, whereas sociolinguistics deem it a socially constructed phenomenon, believing that language is a part of human lives and must, therefore, be studied in the light of its relation to society. Cognitivists believe that language is developmental in nature and develops in cognition slowly and gradually like other cognitive processes, such as thinking, understanding, memory, and problem solving. According to them, human mind slowly absorbs linguistic input, processes it, and then puts it to use for communication purposes.
Okay, my name is Nurjanah Tri Wulandari. Now we talk about linguistic categories and culture. Culture refers to whatever one needs to know or believe in order to function in particular society. Language provides a means of encoding a community's knowledge, beliefs, and values. According to the Native American and Australian Aboriginal languages often cited as example which strongly refute popular misconception about primitive languages. Example given is mistaken claims that simple societies can't have complex grammar. Using Western criteria, the traditional nomadic lifestyles of the Aboriginal people of Australia seems very simple. Their culture, however, is thousands of years old, and their languages are amongst the most interesting and grammatically complex that have been researched. Particular types of experience establish associations which determine the class membership of some items. Here is the durable noun classes table. The next material is the cost of language loss. The fact that every language offers some new interesting linguistic and often cognitive distinctions, a unique window on the world, provides yet another reason to lament language loss. Language loss also entails the loss of insights about human perception. Finally, when people lose their language, their distinctive socio-cultural identity is also put at risk.
My name is Novita Ningrum. I would like to present about the discourse patterns and culture. Social cultural analysis regards discourse as interactional activities and emphasizes the social function of language. This method not only analyzes word and sentence expression, form and meaning, but also analyzes all kinds of social culture factors related to discourse. And the intertwining of language, culture, and perception is evident when we examine research on patterns of interaction too. Cultural difference between the majority and the minority cultures can lead to serious consequences, as a research by Diana it clarifies when comparing Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians. When both groups use the same language, culturally different patterns of interaction can be a source of misunderstanding. Aboriginal societies in Australia place a great importance in the rightness. It is important to avoid being intrusive. This is done by giving people interactional privacy, which is a crucial mechanism in society where there is frequently little physical privacy. In discourse, this sociocultural norm is reflected in a numbering of ways. First, if you want information from an Aboriginal person regarding factual information like location, time, and how people are related, you must use a statement with a rising intonation like, "You are at the store." Second, to have substantial information, less direct statements are used together. The direct questions are not used and they are likely to be responded with "I don't know" or "I don't remember." The information seeker volunteers some of his or her knowledge on the topic and then waits patiently for the other speaker to answer. Example, I heard there was a big argument at the store. The third, in Aboriginal societies, some kinds of information are not freely shared, and silence is much more acceptable as a component of interaction. Since non-Aboriginal norms dominate the Australian society, Aboriginal people are often disadvantaged and misunderstood or misinterpreted as absent or evidence of quiet. Cultures described as positive politeness or solidarity-oriented cultures value involvement with others, while negative politeness cultures emphasize respect and minimize intrusion. On such a basis, Aboriginal society seems a negative politeness culture. In fact, however, Aboriginal society characterized by high international involvement, ongoing social open-ended conversation, and place a great valve on group activity, which builds solidarity. The analysis of interaction patterns in Aboriginal communities raises questions about the adequacy of the sample negative or positive politeness framework. Research and Aboriginal communities suggest that features such as preference of indirect ways of conveying information reflect as distinctive perception of sociocultural relationships. Aboriginal interactions give personal relationship priority over information-oriented goals. They prioritize the effective offer and reflectional dimension. Indirectness is a obligatory aspect of respect, and long non-intrusive silence are tolerated. It seems that preferred discourse patterns and linguistic usages may reflect and even influence a particular view of society, reality, and socio-cultural relationships.
The next material is Language, Social Class, and Cognition. My name is Elvan. I'll tell you about it. So in example 13, they include that 3 classes. First one, middle class children do well in school. Second, working class children don't do well in school. And the third, middle class children speak a different variety of English than the working class children. So, language, social class, and cognition. The center of debate in this study is the relationship of language not only with society but also with cognition. For this purpose, there is a need to study the relation of language with both, as well as discuss the idea of social cognition, which might help us develop an understanding of language as a socio-cognitive phenomenon rather than purely cognitive or social one. So, language, social, and cognition focus on the debate of language being a cognitive or social phenomenon and explores the nature of relationship between the social class of the learners and the cognitive development of syntax. In doing so, it explains how language is not only a cognitive process, but also has something to do with social background of the learners. Many researchers consider the development of syntax in human brain as a cognitive process. Since language evolves as general human cognition evolves, syntax being a component of human language, it is to be taken as a cognitive construct. So the example or to provide sociolinguistics as a discipline has been interested to study language in relation to society. Variationist sociolinguists covered the issue of interaction of language with society as they tried to explore how social stratification impacts various aspects of language, according to Labov 1972 and Chuham 2003. Social constructionism provides the basis of this idea as its proponents believe that lives of the individuals are constructed under the influence of our social selves. Studies of language variation in sociolinguistics, in the same way, try to make a link between the social selves of the individuals and the kind of language they speak. The differences of language used by the individuals are thus believed to be the representation of the context that have gone into the making of the social selves of the individuals. Although the focus of the study is to look for social class as a correlate of synthetic variations among the students, it is pertinent that an understanding of social stratification and social class is also reached to that the issues related to its correlation with academic achievement in general and with synthetic development in particular become clearer at later stages of the study. So, in conclusion, language influences our perceptions of reality. There's also psycholinguistic evidence that the existence of particular categories in a language may predispose speakers to classify reality in one way rather than another. The second, languages develop the vocabulary that the speakers need. The physical and cultural environment in which it develops influences the vocabulary and grammar of a language. Grammatical gender is another such category which often signals both physically and culturally important distinctions, with roots deep in the mythology and belief systems of a community. And the last one, when cultural and social change occurs, the linguistic system generally adapts. The language and discourse patterns associated with a particular culture may not only represent existing social relationships, they may also influence the way one group interacts with another. That's all from us. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.